Good morning. I'm going to get set up here. You know, there's a debate, there has been a debate for a long time about whether or not you should have instruments in worship. And it was even a Baptist thing. In 1600s, Baptists didn't have instruments in their worship. Spurgeon has some quote where he says something about, I don't need a box to worship any more than I do to pray. I understand what they're saying. I'm not really on that side. I can't help but think there is no way that God heard what we just did and that he was disappointed with it. What we just did was beautiful, wasn't it? The voices lifted up to him, the instruments played for him, all for his glory. And I'm just thankful for it. So I want to tell you that. I'm thankful for being part of that. Today we're going to be in Isaiah chapter 6. And as we go there, I'm getting a little feedback from the microphone. I hear a ring. Maybe it's just in my head. One of the things I love about being at a place like Oak Cliff is that I get to be around disciples. And you know, I'm a stranger to most of you. I have preached here a couple times. It's been a long time since I was last here. Probably, I don't know if any of you know me. But it doesn't matter, does it? Because we're all part of one body, the same body. And my goal today is, I believe, your goal. We want to worship God. We're here to glorify him, to lift him up, and to see his name praised, to praise it. This universal body. I can come in here and I can preach to you with such joy and with such confidence because I know that we both want that same thing. We're looking for Christ and we want to hear from him. And here's the thing, it's always been that way. You remember when Jesus was preaching a message and a bunch of people left and he turned to his disciples, the small group. He said, what about you? You want to leave too? What did Peter say? Where else are we going to go? You have the words of life. They couldn't leave. They had to stay there and listen to him. And he says, we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. And I feel like that's us this morning. We want to hear the words of life. And we're going to find that, I think, in Isaiah chapter 6 this morning. The kings of Israel and Judah, you know, it was a split kingdom. They had not done a very good job for the most part. They had led Israel away. Many of them had. They had some good ones, but not many. In the first 5 chapters of Isaiah, he lays out this case against them. He says, even the ox knows its owner. Even something as dumb as an ox knows its owner. A donkey recognizes its master's care, but Israel does not know its master. My people don't recognize my care for them. Oh, what a sinful nation they are, loaded with a burden of guilt. They are evil people, corrupt children who have rejected the Lord. They've despised the Holy One of Israel and turned their backs on him. He goes on to say in those first several chapters that they have done all of this through rebellion, that they have done all of this through their oppression of the widows and the poor. They have done all of this through their abuse and through their denial of justice and through their idolatry and all these sins that he lays out against them. This is what you've done. You don't even know who your God is. And the result of it is a broken covenant. The result of it is, remember that old covenant, do or die. You must do this. If you're going to be my people and I'm going to be your God, you have to live in a certain way. You have to walk a certain path. Isaiah was the prophet who was sent to them to say, this is what you've done. You have broken your end of the covenant, so now this is what I'm going to do. Let's see what he says in Isaiah chapter 6, how he gets called to that place. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1, it starts out by saying, in the year that King Uzziah died. Now, that's an important thing. You can't just skip over that because Uzziah was an important figure. If you've never read about him, you should. He's got an interesting story. He was a great king. He had a bunch of military victories. Judah's army had suffered some, and he came in and he brought it right back up. He made it strong again. He was making Judah great again, is what he did. He had a strong military. He built towers and fortifications. He improved the economy. He did all kinds of wonderful things. But his problem was he had some pride. He thought he could offer some sacrifices, and he got in trouble for that. He got leprosy. So he didn't actually finish out his kingship as a king. His son came in and was like a co-regent kind of thing. And the problem was that there was this upcoming threat from a nation called Assyria. It wasn't major yet, but it was coming. And I guess people could see it at the time. They knew this was going to happen. And so his death was a cause for worry. Here we've got this king who's come in. He's been a good king. And we've gone through these cycles of good king, bad king, good king, bad king. What's the next one going to be like? We got this major threat coming up. We're pretty well prepared, but what are we going to do? And so Isaiah starts his message out by saying, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw what? I saw the Lord. And where was he? Seated on a throne. I saw him sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. First thing I want you to notice is the object of the vision. Who are we looking at? We see him seated on his throne. Here's the thing. The king is dead. The high king is not. We've got a little bit of a worry. We've got a little bit of a problem coming up. The king is dead. But our Lord is seated on his throne. He's not going anywhere, and there's nothing at all wrong with him. And it reminds me of Revelation 4, where all of the nations are gathered around the throne, and they're all looking at him. He's the focal point. And he's the focal point of all the scriptures. He's the focal point of this service. He's the focal point of our lives. He's right where he's supposed to be, front and center, and he's high and lifted up. He's the King of kings and the Lord of lords. He's the one who is seated on his throne, and nothing has changed. That's the point. That's the point I want to drive home for you right now. You may have some kind of worry of your own. You say, I don't know what I'm going to do. Listen to me. God is still on the throne. He's still exactly where he was in the time of Isaiah. He's still exactly where he was when Adam fell, when Cain killed Abel, when Noah was in the ark, when Daniel was in the den, when David was on the run from Saul, when Jesus was on the cross. He's still in the same place. He is high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. You've probably heard that described, and it's not wrong. It's a symbol. These kings, they wore these. It's kind of ridiculous looking at it from our perspective. But these long trains. They had a robe with a really long train on it. And the longer, the better. The wealthier you were, the more prestigious. I don't know if he means it filled the temple from top to bottom. I think he probably means it was long enough to fill the entire floor. His train, he was so illustrious. He was so prestigious. He was so wealthy. He was so successful. His train wasn't just 10 feet long. It wasn't just 40 feet long. It filled the whole temple. He's glorious, and he's amazing, and he's great. And above him stood the seraphim. Here's an image. What do these seraphim look like? What image is in your mind when you think of angels hovering over God? You picture fat little babies hovering over there, playing a harp maybe. Maybe instead you picture like these great warriors, right? Big muscle men, bodybuilders with wings. You know what the Hebrew word for this is, for seraphim? Fiery serpents. That kind of changes the scene, doesn't it? Just think about this scene for just a second. If you were standing in the presence of something that was described as a fiery serpent, an angelic being that gets this description, what would you do? How about this? What would they do? Do you think they would even notice you? Do you think they would care about you? These things are so amazing. It must have been terrifying to Isaiah. In fact, we know that it was terrifying because of his response to it. And here they are. Fiery serpents, terrifying angelic beings. And they cover their eyes. And they cover their feet. Like Moses, you remember he said, you have to take off your shoes because this is holy ground? He's so holy, he's so above them, he's so much greater. They can't even put their eyes on him. They're terrified of him too. They shout out to each other, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Holy, holy, holy. You probably heard that said too. It's an emphasis. He's not just holy, he's holy, holy, holy. More separate from anything in creation than any of us can ever be. That's what the word holy means. You know that. It doesn't just mean like pious. It means separated. He's so different from us. He's not like Isaiah. He's not like us. Even these fiery serpents, as amazing and magnificent and powerful as they are, they have to say, holy, holy, holy. He's not like us either. There's none like him. And when they sang this song, it says, the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And the smoke, that's the presence of God. That's the glory of God. It's the same thing as, you remember when they had the tabernacle, the glory of the Lord came down onto the mercy seat. When the priest went in on the Day of Atonement, he had to have that incense with him, and he had full of smoke to hide him. So it's kind of like this twofold purpose. One, it represents the presence of God, and two, it hides people from his presence. And he's saying, I saw these angels shouting this out, holy, 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 and then the whole place was filled with smoke, and the foundation shook. I think about the mountain. You remember in Exodus 19, 20, and all that? They're going to go up on top of that mountain. They're going to go up there and they're going to meet God. Israelites fresh out of slavery, watching those 10 plagues, looking at that water separate and the dry land as they cross over. The terror they must have felt when they realized the Egyptians are coming across too. And how much longer, God? Till you bring the water back down. Then he finally does, and it collapses on those Egyptians, and they all die. And here they go, they're marching out, right? We're going to go to the promised land now. Everybody's excited. We're going to go up that mountain, and we're going to worship God. And I like to imagine that some of the people had in their minds, we're going to go see God. Isn't this great? We're going to go up to the top of the mountain. We're going to have us a picnic. We're going to enjoy this time together. How'd that go? You remember what happened? The lightning and the thunder and the rumbling. And what they say, they said, Moses, nuh-uh, you go. Changed their minds, didn't it? When you see the holiness of God, it changes your mind about wanting to be near him. When the people in Revelation see him, they're standing in front of his throne and they say, fall on us to the rocks and to the mountains. Hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne. Because we've seen his glory, we've seen his holiness. And we don't want to be anywhere near it. This is the scene Isaiah is seeing. It's utterly terrifying. We read this passage. All of you have read this passage 1,000 times, haven't you? Have you ever seen the terror of it? Have you ever seen the greatness of it, the fear of it? Listen to what Isaiah says. I said, verse 5, woe is me. Now, if you ever read other translations, the New Living Translation, it's an okay translation, but what it's great for is getting a sense of the feel. And the way that they translate this, he says, it's all over. Isaiah looks at God, he looks at those angels, he sees the smoke, he hears and feels the rumbling, and he says, oh no, it's all over. I am in big, big trouble. Why? Because I'm lost. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And I dwell in the midst of those people, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. It's all over. I'm lost. I'm ruined. I'm undone. I'm cut off. I'm destroyed. I'm doomed. That's a pretty typical response if you read through the rest of the scriptures. You remember when Ezekiel saw the Son of Man, saw the glory of the Lord, he said, I fell straight on my face. Daniel had a similar response. He said, when I saw him, my radiant appearance, I went in there happy. I had a radiant appearance. I was full of joy. It was suddenly changed. All of a sudden I realized I'm in a bad spot. This is very, very dangerous. You remember that quote from C.S. Lewis about what was that, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? They're going to meet the lion, Aslan, who's kind of a representative of Christ. And one of the kids says, well, is he safe? And the gopher says, no, he's not safe. He's extremely dangerous. Daniel sees this vision. He says, my radiant appearance was suddenly, fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. I went faint. Then I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard them, I fell on my face in deep sleep with my face to the ground. You think that means that like he went into a slow and peaceful trance, or do you think he passed out? He was terrified. I went in happy. I went in whistling. Hey, I'm going to go see God today. And then no. I don't want to be here. John even. John. The one who saw Jesus and knew him. He's on that island in Patmos. He sees him and he says, I fell on my face as though dead. I was terrified. And for Isaiah, it was the same thing, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen what they saw. I have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. He was a sinner. We get this image in our minds. We get this idea in our heads of these Old Testament saints as being Old Testament saints, right? I mean, they never smile. They have these piercing eyes, and they always know exactly what to say. They always do the right thing, but that's not who they were. I mean, you remember that Abraham lived, it says in Joshua that Abraham lived with his fathers beyond the river, where they worshipped false idols, where they worshipped other gods. Abraham was an idolater. Moses had all kinds of problems. Joshua had all kinds of problems. David. All of our heroes of the Old Testament, well, they're only heroes because it was by grace that they were saved through faith, and that they were empowered by God to walk in a way that was pleasing to him. It was always about him. They weren't perfect men. They weren't perfect women. They were people of unclean lips. No way. This is even more significant, understanding that Uzziah had leprosy. He was an unclean man. You remember how they treated that. You weren't fit for service. You weren't fit to be in the presence of God. You weren't fit to be in the tabernacle anywhere. You're not even fit to live with God's people. You have to be isolated and set apart. Isaiah says, I saw this vision, and I saw the holiness of God. And you know what I realized? I have no business being here. Not only am I of unclean lips, I live among a people of unclean lips. It goes back to my father and to my grandfather. And we've got these records, we have this genealogy, and we can see that it goes all the way back to Adam. My life is full of uncleanness. My life is full of wickedness. If you came here today and you feel like I deserve to be in the presence of God because I haven't been so bad, you do not see him high and lifted up. We can come in, I'll get to this in a minute. We can come in with joy and confidence because our hope is in Christ. That's where we see him high and lifted up there. Isaiah says, I am a man of unclean lips. I have heritage of unclean people. And here's the biggest problem. My eyes have seen the King. My eyes have seen the Lord of hosts. Now, this is just a vision. Do you remember what God told Moses? He says, nobody can see me and live. Nobody can see my face and live. And even in a vision, Isaiah sees this. He says, I don't deserve to live. If those fiery serpents have no chance, they have to cover their own eyes. Here I am, I've actually seen him. What am I going to do? What chance have I got? And he was terrified. Now, that's the terrifying part. Let's get to the gospel. Verse 6. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, behold, this has touched your lips. This has touched your unclean lips, the thing that has made you feel and made you realize that you are unworthy to be in my presence. Your guilt is what? What's it say? Your guilt is what? Taken away. The thing that made you unworthy to be here, I just took it away. And you didn't do anything except realize that you needed it. Here you are, standing in front of the King, standing in front of the Lord, high and lifted up on his throne. The Lord that no one can see and live. The Lord that these fiery serpents are terrified of themselves. And they can't do anything but shout, holy, holy, holy. There's nothing good in you, you're right. But I'm going to put this on your lips. I'm going to symbolize the purification of your sins to this coal, to this. And I'm going to take your sin away. Your sin is atoned for. What an amazing thing to take away his impurity and to do it for his own purpose. You'll remember later on in Isaiah 48, verse 9, he says, for my name's sake I defer my anger. For the sake of my praise I restrain it for you, that I may not cut you off. Where did Isaiah get that? How did he know that? He was the one who wrote that. I just read Isaiah 48:9. Isaiah was the one who wrote that. Look, this is what God says. For my own name's sake, I'm going to save you. I'm going to purify you. I'm going to take away your sin. I know that he can do it for you because he did it for me. He took away my sin, and he did it for the sake of his own praise. See, the realization of sin has a purpose. You have a story. I was saved reading 2 Samuel. I'd done a whole lot of bad things. And I got to 2 Samuel chapter 12. David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. He had her husband murdered. He'd done all these terrible things. Tried to cover it up, make it a secret. Nathan comes to him. He tells him this story about a rich man who took the poor man's sheep. And David got mad, and he said, oh, that should have never happened. That guy deserves to die. And Nathan says, oh, yeah? You're the man. All David could say to that was, I have sinned against the Lord. When I read that, I knew for a fact, that's me. I am right there myself. What did Nathan say? The Lord has taken away your sin. You're not going to die. That was the gospel. That was the first time I heard and understood the gospel. All of you have a very similar story. It starts very similarly to this. This realization of sin, this realization of I'm in big trouble. I need something that I can't have. I've got to have something I cannot get for myself. Then you realize God can purify your uncleanness. And he does it for the sake of his own name. Isaiah has no business being there, that's true. You have no business being here with God's people. You have no business approaching the throne of grace, expecting anything, except for the fact that God has a plan. The same plan he had for Isaiah, the same plan he's always had for his people, a plan that removes sin and makes us worthy. That's what Isaiah sees here. That's what Isaiah experiences here. That's what each of us have experienced. This understanding of salvation. Now, why did God do it? What's he got in mind? What does God want to do from this point forward for Isaiah? Look at verse 8. I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then I said, here am I, send me. Now, y'all know these verses, right? Everybody's heard this passage. In fact, you've probably heard at least one song that references this verse. And there's a bunch of them. They're popular. I haven't heard one. There may be one that exists, but I haven't heard one that has got it right, though. They're popular, but they're wrong. This passage is not about missions. This passage here is not about the love of God. It's not about the beautiful feet that spread good news. There's a place for that, but that's not what this passage is about. This passage is more about his judgment on his people. Israel is full of wickedness and sin, and I'm going to judge them. That's the message we're about to see. It's not so much a celebration. When you hear those songs, you can't help but think, well, this is just a big celebration of God's goodness, and I want to go, so send me. Send me to the people who want to hear. That's not what's happening in this passage, though. These people do not want to hear. They hate the message. They know the message. They're not searching. They are suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. So it's not a celebration, it's a warning. There is no tickling of the ears in this passage. There is no your best life now mentality. Instead, this is all about judgment. It's about the defeat and the suffering and the slavery and the death that are coming to the nation. That's hardly inspiring, isn't it? Nobody's going to sing a song about that. All the songs we sang this morning, they're all about the gospel. They're all about grace. Wonderful songs. None of them about death and slavery and judgment and terrifying nature of the Lord. Some of the prophets who went and told this message, what happened to them? You remember Hebrews 11? Tradition has that Isaiah was sawn in two, which is actually mentioned in Hebrews. Some of these people were executed and tortured in the most brutal, horrific ways because their message was the same as this. But Isaiah doesn't know what the message is quite yet. Maybe he wouldn't have been so quick to say, "Here am I, send me." But it's too late. He's already said it. And for now, he's excited. "Here am I, send me." What are we going to say? Verse 9. And he said, "Go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed." So the first message that God has for Isaiah is one that is totally fruitless. Imagine putting that on your resume. I preached a sermon that no one could understand, and I did it on purpose. That's not very good. Why would you do that? It's funny how we define success today, isn't it? Success. What is success in a thriving church? Well, we're going to have a lot of people. That's one thing. We're going to have people who love to come to church, and they come regularly. And man, they really worship, and we can really fill the house with music. People are moved, and they feel excited and inspired. Or maybe it's success. I got me a seminary degree. Our preacher's a doctor. That's success. It's positive reception. That's success. We're going to go out in the community. We're going to witness. We're going to tell people about Jesus. And when they all turn from their sins, that's how we know we did what we were supposed to do. Are those the definition of success? I'm between pastorates right now, and that's one of the questions that I've been asked a whole bunch. Is how would you define success? And my answer on this is always the same. For a Christian, for a pastor, the definition of success is obedience. Did you do what you were sent to do? And maybe you can do it through inspiring music. Maybe you can do it with a pastor with a doctorate, with a seminary degree. Maybe you do it and you have a big positive reception. But what if you have none of those things? Are you a failure? I sure felt that way before in my ministry. When things didn't go the way that I thought they ought to go, I couldn't accomplish what I set out to do. Was I a failure? Not if I obeyed God. Not if I did exactly what I was supposed to do. Imagine this. Jeremiah goes and he preaches a message. And he's got this great big hope. I'm going to go and I'm going to revolutionize God's people. I'm going to help them understand the truth. And he goes in there and he's so full of just passion and energy. And he's got this word and this message ready. And he delivers it with the best of his ability. And what was their response? What'd they do? They shoved him down a well. From the bottom of that well, was Jeremiah a success or a failure? Somebody tell me, which was he? Was he a success? Yeah. He did exactly what he was supposed to do, and he had 0 converts. Nobody believed him. Nobody cared. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. What about Noah? Preacher of righteousness. You think he went around, he was telling people, look, man, the rain is coming, the flood's coming. We're going to be in big trouble. Nobody got on, just his family. Success or failure? What about Paul? Paul in prison? People wouldn't believe him. They threw rocks at him, tried to kill him. They whipped him, beat him, drove him out. What about Jesus on the cross? What about Jesus on the cross? That was the whole reason he came. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. It was nothing but success. Isaiah's success is, you will have no converts. No one will believe you. They will not hear you. They will not see your point of view. Their hearts will be so hard they are not going to accept it. The only thing that you can do is go and preach. And that message is simple. Judgment is coming. That's chapter 8. Judgment is coming. Well, what should I say? Never hear, never understand, never see. What's the purpose? So that their hearts are hardened, so that they're dull, lest they see and turn. That seems kind of strange. Why wouldn't God want them to see and turn? Isn't that the point of the message? No, that's not the point of the message. He understands that these people will do anything to keep from being judged. They will reform. If that's, hey, you're saying the Assyrians are coming? Okay, we'll reform. That's nothing but fear. That's not holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, woe is me, I'm unclean. That's, here come the Assyrians, we better act right before he comes here and judges us. God says, so they're just not even going to believe you at all. They're going to get exactly what they deserve and exactly what they need. And so verse 11, I said, how long, O Lord? I mean, these are the descendants of Abraham, children of the promise. Your people, that when Moses prayed for them, he said, look, don't destroy them completely or everybody's going to see and they're going to say, what happened to their God? I thought he was so great. Isaiah says, well, how long? Because we know you can't wipe us out completely. When the Assyrians come and they murder and butcher as many people as they can, and when they tote them off to live in other countries, how long are you going to let that go on? How long will your judgment stand against us? And he said, until cities lie waste without inhabitant. Let that sink in for a second. Can you imagine if Fort Smith faced the judgment of God until the entire city was without inhabitant? There'd be no more road rage, would there? No more rush hour. Just a big, empty city. How long are you going to do this, God, until the cities lie waste and houses without people and the land is a desolate waste and the Lord removes people far away and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land, and though 1/10 remain in it, it will be burned again. I'm going to knock you out and then I'm going to keep going. That's not really a message of grace, is it? That's not very inspiring. It will be burned again like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. Wait, what? Hold on. What did you say? I'm going to do this until a tenth remain in it, and then it'll be burned again like a tree whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. How long are you going to do this? I'm going to do it until judgment's passed. I'm going to do this until it's all gone. Kind of reminds you of the flood, doesn't it? The whole world was wicked, bent on evil all the time. God says, we're going to take all that away, and we're going to get it down to just this one man and his family. For Israel, they saw themselves as God people. God sees us as beautiful. I'm not like those other nations. I'm not like them with all their pagan ways. We're God's people. We know the way. And God says, yeah, you are a big tree, but you are full of rotten fruit. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to burn away 90%, and then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to cut you down to the stump until only that remains, only the seed remains. Now, let me ask you something. Is this what you expected to hear? If the only thing you know about this passage is those songs that get sang, is this what you would expect to hear? Is this the message? You're just going to destroy us? Is it a good message? How is this good for his name? The God who brought them out of Egypt couldn't even keep them, except the holy seed is its stump. Here's what we're going to do. I see this great big tree, and yeah, it's big. It's got a lot of fruit, but it's rotten. I'm going to chop it back. How far are you going to go back? Oh, I'm going to cut off all the branches. All the branches? I'm going to cut off every one of them. I'm going to cut off 90% of the tree. In fact, I'm going to cut it off the trunk so that only the stump remains. I'm going to scale this thing back until the only thing that is worth keeping is kept. This is a New Testament thing. Did you know that? Remember Jesus, he went and he told all these people, he did all these miracles, did all these wonderful things, and they didn't believe him. And it was John, it's John 12:41. He remembers that Isaiah said this. He's looking at Jesus, he sees the miracles, and he looks at the people's reaction, and he goes, what? Isaiah saw this. And he quotes this verse. And then he says, Isaiah said these things. Listen to this. Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him. Isaiah saw Christ. Isaiah saw that holy stump, that holy seed, the only thing worth keeping when it comes to standing in front of God, to being accepted by God. He sees that stump. He saw his glory. And in preaching this message, you say, well, what's the point of this message? I mean, if all we do is we just cut the tree down and we remove all the people, and the only thing we have left is Jesus, what do we do? What are we trying to accomplish here? What's the practical application? If you were to take this to work tomorrow and you said, man, I heard this sermon yesterday about Isaiah chapter 6, and this is how I can apply it. This is what I learned. What is it? Like I said, it's not very inspiring. What are you going to go? You're going to go tell everybody what rotten sinners they are and God's going to judge you? Where are you going to go with that? Well, he does a couple of things, actually. First, he takes away every excuse for their judgment. Every excuse that they have in judgment is gone, because you did hear the message. You just suppressed it. You know the truth. You know who Christ is. You know what he wants. It's kind of like when Jesus was talking, he says, you people have a judge. It's the words that I speak against you. You have a judge. It's Moses. You know the truth. The fact is you reject it. But see, your nature is you're unclean. Your nature is that you are unholy and you turn away from the truth. And you think you can walk into his presence without any kind of regard for his holiness. You think you're going to work a deal with God. You think that you're going to be on maybe a similar level to him and he's going to understand all your shortcomings. That's what Israel thought. Israel thought we're good. God warned him in Deuteronomy 9, do not say in your heart, we're different from these other people. You are a stiff-necked and rebellious group. They proved it. Remember Isaiah 53? Suffering servant. What was it they said? We thought he was hanging there for his own sins. We thought that he was up on that cross because of the wrong that he had done. But God has laid on him the iniquity of us. It's actually my sins are the reasons he was hanging there. But they didn't understand that. They were spiritually blind. This takes away any kind of excuse they have in that day of judgment. But it also does something else. You see, you have the terror of the law, so to speak. You have this woe is me. But that is not the gospel. The gospel is what we see here. It gives us a glimmer of hope. Listen to me. This angry, holy, living, sovereign, powerful God, the Lord of hosts, will not cut us off entirely. He will not wipe out his people. That's what he could do. Probably we could say what he should do. But he says, I'm going to keep a remnant. I'm going to make a way. So when you go out into the world, you see this. You see all these people out there, all these sinners. You see them in your work. You see them in your home. You see it in yourself. And you know that what we need is the gospel. You know that what we need is to present Christ the only thing worth keeping. So you find these people and you say, these people are sinners. But here's the message. God is going to judge the world. But he keeps that stump, that remnant. Just like it says in Romans 11, at the present time there is a remnant chosen by grace. There is a group of people that God has chosen to save, and Christ is the seed. Everything that comes from him is holy. What a wonder when you read Romans 11 and he's talking about grafting in branches. What a wonder when you read when Jesus is saying, I'm the vine and you're the branches. In me you will bear much fruit. How is it that we come to bear much fruit? It's not because the branches are so committed to the cause and because the branches are so holy and upright. It has everything to do with the remaining stump. If you live in me, you will bear this fruit. Folks, that's the gospel. You want to be accepted by God? You've got to come through me. You want to do what's right? You want to be righteous? You want to stand in front of that throne and not cry out to the rocks to hide you from the face of him who sits on the throne? You've got to stand in me. Because everybody that comes through him is purged. You are no longer unclean. So here's what I want you to do with this. First thing I want you to do is I want you to recognize his holiness. He is holy, holy, holy. He is worthy to be praised. I want you to stand in awe of him. Could not care less if you remember my name or not. I want you to remember that king on his throne. I want you to see him high and lifted up and say, man, God, you are great. I want you to stand in awe of the powerful and living King, and I want you to apply it to every part of your lives. Look, Uzziah is dead. The year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up. In the year that the foundation of my life was shaken and ruined and everything seemed to fall apart, I saw the Lord high and lifted up in his place. He was sovereign and he was over everything. No matter what happens to me, I am protected, I am safe. Oh, bad things can happen. Christians have suffered some of the most gruesome deaths. But God was on his throne and every promise was kept. I want you to see his graciousness. I want you to see how good he is there. Man, when that confession was made, woe is me, he was faithful to purify. Those of you who believe, you know this story personally, don't you? He has cleansed my sin. What a gracious God we serve. Imagine the train of his robe filled the temple. It's shaking and there's smoke. It's so terrifying. Even those powerful serpents, they can't look at him. And yet he's loved you. And yet he has made a way for you. He calls you his son. He says, well done, good and faithful servant. To me? Do you know me? Do you know the things I've done, the things I've said, the things that I think? That song, that third hymn we sang, I love that song. Because everything is right there. The promises are sure. That's what we're hoping for. I want you to see his sovereignty through this. I want you to acknowledge his sovereignty. It's Isaiah also that later says his word will accomplish what he sends it out to do. That's amazing, isn't it? I want you to go and speak to these people and they're not going to listen, but my word will accomplish what I send it out to do. Our job is to send it. Last thing I want you to do, I want you to celebrate the seed. I want you to celebrate the remnant. Throughout my ministry, it's always been my goal to glorify Christ. That's kind of my little catchphrase, is I want to point you to Christ. I want you to see Christ in everything we do. I've been preaching for about 17 years. And it's always been that. Look at him. Look at him. You say, I can't live up to his holiness. I can't do this. You're right. But he says there is no condemnation for those who are in me. I can't do what you want me to do. You know what? The veil is torn in half from top to bottom. Do you understand how significant that is? That veil kept people out of God's presence. It was very intentional. One man, one time a year, after he had done all of the things that he had to do to even be able to go in. And even then he might die. Listen to this. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 19. Turn there if you will. Hebrews 10:19. Isaiah walked into that holy place, and it was nothing but terror. Since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, since the holy stump is where we live, since his blood, not a coal from a fire, his blood has purified not our lips, but our hearts, our minds, our bodies, everything about us has been made clean, so that there is no charge. Since all that's happened, let us draw near with a true heart, in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water, let us hold fast the confession of our faith without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. Folks, when you read Isaiah chapter 6 and you see the terror that's presented there, you see the message that's presented there, it might look like it's one of hopelessness, except he puts that little part about Christ, that little bit of the gospel. I'm going to cut it down 90% plus. But it won't be gone. A stump remains. This is your hope. He is the one who has gone into that holy place, who has torn the veil in half from top to bottom. He is the confession of our faith, and he is the one who promised and is faithful. What does that mean specifically? Here's another verse you know, and the last one I'm going to read, Hebrews 4:16. Let us with confidence do what? Let us with confidence draw near. You think Isaiah was trying to draw near when he was saying, woe is me? I don't think he was. I think he was getting as far away from that as he could. Let us draw near with confidence. Let us walk right into that throne room with boldness. Let us approach that throne that we may receive mercy and find grace and help in our time of need. I want you to worship him because he's worthy. Brother Lindell.